As a kid, I grew up in a normal neighborhood. We had a nice mid-sized home and a very ordinary family. When I turned 7, we adopted a small dog named Max. He was my best friend for years, and as I grew up, I'd often find myself home alone. But with Max there, I never really felt alone. He was my companion, my comfort, and my guardian in many ways. I never felt the need to worry or be afraid of anything. Unfortunately, this didn't last forever. When I turned 15, my family sold our home and moved 20 minutes away to a smaller, more isolated house in a heavily forested area. It felt like a different world, quieter, lonelier, and, in some strange way, unsettling. That summer, Max passed away due to old age. Losing him was devastating. I was grateful that it was summer because it gave me time to grieve at home without having to face school or friends. For days, the whole family mourned together, sharing stories about Max and crying over the loss of our beloved dog. But as life often does, it moved on. My parents returned to work, leaving me at home alone during my summer break. That's when I began to notice how different everything felt. It was the first time I'd ever truly been alone in my life. Completely alone. Without Max's reassuring presence, every creak and groan of the house set my nerves on edge. I was constantly paranoid, uneasy about every small sound. The unfamiliarity of the new house didn't help. We'd only lived there for a few months, and I hadn't adjusted to its quirks or the eerie silence of the surrounding forest. One particular morning, just a week after Max's passing, my parents left for work as usual. It seemed like any other day. The house was a single story with a straightforward layout. The front door opened to the kitchen and living room, which led to a long hallway. Off the hallway were 2 rooms on the sides, and my parents' bedroom at the very end. For some reason, I developed a habit of walking down the hallway and closing all the bedroom doors whenever I was home alone. Seeing them open gave me a strange, uncomfortable feeling, as though something might be lurking just out of sight. That morning was no different. I went down the hallway, closing each door one by one. When I reached my parents' room, I pulled the door shut and began walking back, but something made me pause. I didn't hear the distinct click of the door latching. Turning around, I went back and firmly pulled it closed, ensuring it clicked this time. Satisfied, I returned to my room, shut the door, and settled in at my desk. I put on my headphones and began watching YouTube videos to pass the time. Nearly 2 hours flew by before I decided to take a break and grab some breakfast. As I removed my headphones and stepped into the hallway, I immediately felt something was off. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed it, the door at the end of the hallway. It was wide open. I froze in place, my heart pounding in my chest. For what felt like an eternity, I stood there, silent and unmoving, straining to hear any sound coming from my parents' room. Nothing, not a single creak, shuffle, or breath. I knew I had closed that door, twice, and it wasn't the kind of door that could simply swing open on its own. Panic began to set in as I realized the implications. Someone could be in the house. I hadn't heard any unusual noises while I was in my room, but with my headphones on, I could have missed anything. Trying to stay calm, I slowly made my way to the kitchen, checking every corner as I went. My eyes darted around the living room and dining area, searching for any sign of movement. When I reached the kitchen, I grabbed one of my parents' large steak knives, clutching it tightly in my right hand. The cold steel gave me a faint sense of security, but the fear remained overwhelming. Methodically, I checked each room, starting with the spare bedroom. The door creaked loudly as I opened it, making me wince. Inside, everything appeared untouched, exactly as we'd left it. Slowly, I backed out and closed the door again. Then came my parents' room. Standing in the hallway, I stared at the open door, my grip on the knife tightening. My pulse raced as I debated whether to go inside. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves outside. Finally, I forced myself to move, Stepping cautiously into the room, I scanned every corner. The bed, the dresser, the closet, everything seemed normal. I crouched down and peeked under the bed, half expecting to see someone hiding there. Nothing. Just as I was beginning to think I'd imagined the whole thing, I noticed something. A small patch of dirt on the floor near the bathroom door. Before I could process it, a soft thud came from behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. The bathroom door, which had been closed, now seemed ominous. From beneath it, I could see faint shadows moving. Then, the sound of frantic shuffling reached my ears. For a moment, I stood frozen in fear, unable to move or breathe. Then came another thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps fading away. I rushed to the bathroom door, gripping the knife as tightly as I could. Slowly, I pushed it open. The window was wide open, the curtains billowing in the breeze. Whoever had been in my house was now gone. My wife and I take yearly vacations to different places. It's our way of escaping the monotony of everyday life, a chance to get away from everything and spend some quality time together. This year, we had a cabin booked in Washington State. It was far out, described online as being quiet and peaceful, away from other people and places. Most of our life is spent in crowded cities, so this sounded like the perfect escape. When we flew in, we made our way to a small grocery store to pick up what we needed, and then we took a taxi out to the cabin. We didn't rent a car because we knew we'd only be there for 3 days, and we wanted to spend all of it just at the cabin. Plus, if we changed our minds or needed anything else, we could always order an Uber. The taxi ride was over an hour from the town where we landed. Most of the drive took us through winding roads surrounded by massive mountain ranges and dense, tree-covered landscapes. The scenery was breathtaking, and both of us felt an exhilarating excitement building inside of us for what was to come. The peacefulness of the woods felt like the perfect antidote to our hectic, city-driven lives. Then, at around 7 p.m., we arrived at the cabin. It sat completely alone in the middle of the forest. Even the driveway leading to it wasn't much more than a few tire tracks pressed into the dirt. We stepped out, paid the taxi, and unloaded our bags into the cabin. It was small, nothing too fancy, but charming in its simplicity. The main floor held the kitchen and living room, and a ladder led up to a loft area where the bed was located. The loft was very short, though, so short that you literally had to crawl into bed, kind of like what you'd find in a tiny home. We unpacked the groceries and quickly threw together a simple dinner. We were both tired from the flight, but we opened a bottle of wine and settled in for the evening. We lit the fireplace and started chatting about how we were looking forward to the next few days. Everything felt perfect. It was around 11 p.m. when it happened. As we were talking, we both suddenly heard something outside. Someone was walking in the grass near the cabin. It wasn't just a faint sound, it was loud, like they were right outside, moving deliberately, step by step. My wife looked at me, her face pale, and I could see the nervousness in her eyes. I tried to keep my composure, putting on a brave face. "It's fine," I told her. "Probably just an animal." But then I stood up and walked over to the window to look outside. It wasn't until I opened the blinds that I realized just how dark it had gotten outside. I could see nothing but towering trees, and beyond them, pitch blackness. I looked around the entire area but saw nothing. I told her I didn't see anyone. "Maybe it was nothing," I added, trying to reassure her. I went to the front door, stepped out onto the porch, and flicked on the outdoor lights. The dim glow illuminated only a small portion of the driveway, but still, no one was there. The forest was eerily quiet now, and I couldn't hear anything that might indicate someone was still out there. I closed the door and went back inside. "Did you hear anything?" I asked my wife, but she shook her head, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "No," she whispered. "It just stopped. It didn't fade away. It was like it stopped suddenly." From somewhere behind the cabin, my brave act was quickly faltering. I told her to go up to the loft, stay quiet, and lock the door. I would figure out what was going on. The last thing I wanted was for her to be scared, but I knew we were in a situation that could get out of hand quickly. I checked all the windows, peering into the dark night, but saw nothing. The stillness outside was unnerving. I returned to the front door, my heart pounding. I was preparing myself to go back outside and see if I could find anything when a sudden thump shook the entire cabin. My wife froze, staring up at the ceiling. Someone was on the roof. I rushed inside and immediately dialed 911, giving them as many details as I could about our location, though I knew it would take a while for them to reach us. Over the course of the next hour, we occasionally heard footsteps walking across the top of the cabin. The sound of boots shifting on the roof echoed in the quiet night, sending chills down my spine. About 45 minutes into our wait, though, the footsteps suddenly stopped. We heard a dull thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots hitting the ground. Then nothing. Absolute silence. I moved cautiously to the window and peered out, straining my eyes against the darkness. That's when I saw it. A shadow moving swiftly through the trees, their outline barely visible against the blackness of the forest. Whoever it was, they were calmly walking away from the cabin, heading deeper into the woods. The police finally arrived about 15 minutes later. They took our report and we asked them what they thought might have happened, but there were no answers. They gave us a ride back into town, and we spent the rest of our vacation there, unable to shake the unease that had settled in our bones. What that person had been doing miles away from civilization, deep in the forest, is something I'll never understand. They were likely waiting for us to either fall asleep or step outside. I shudder to think what would have happened if we hadn't called for help in time. We were lucky. We got out of there before something else could have happened, but the memory of that night still haunts me. I lived alone in a small house in Upper Wisconsin, situated in a small community with only a couple dozen houses in the area. It was a peaceful spot, several miles away from the nearest town. I'd been living in that same house for about 4 years, and for the most part, I hadn't had any issues. I liked the quiet, away from the noise of city life, surrounded by nothing but trees and the occasional distant neighbor. It gave me a sense of calm, a privacy I'd grown accustomed to. I worked a normal 9-to-5 job, which meant driving into town most days and getting home around 6. This all happened last year, and it's the reason I no longer live in that house. After it happened, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread, and I ended up selling the house and moving closer to town. The thought of what I experienced still gives me chills. Started one normal morning. I woke up, had my usual time to get ready for work, and grabbed a bowl of cereal for breakfast. Everything felt just like any other day. I got in my car, drove into town, and worked my usual hours. It was only when I started the drive back home around 5 that things started to feel off. The sun was setting by the time I pulled into my driveway, casting long shadows over the yard. By the time I stepped out of the car, it was already dark. I headed inside, dropped my bag on the kitchen chair, and started rummaging through the pantry for something to eat for dinner. But as I scanned the shelves, something struck me as odd. The box of cereal I'd eaten that morning wasn't where I remembered putting it. In fact, it wasn't anywhere at all. Confused, I looked around the kitchen, checking the counters, the pantry, and even the trash, but there was no sign of it. I thought maybe I'd misplaced it or forgotten where I put it, but the longer I searched, the more unsettled I became. Frustrated, I gave up, making a quick dinner and trying to push the thought of the missing cereal out of my mind. I ate and spent the rest of the night watching TV, hoping to relax. At 10 p.m., my eyes were growing heavy. I turned off the TV, stumbling into the kitchen to fill up my water bottle before bed. As I walked toward the back door to turn off the porch light, something caught my eye. At the far edge of the yard, just beyond the reach of the porch light, I saw a figure standing among the trees. They were motionless, just a silhouette in the dark. I couldn't make out any details, but I knew someone or something was out there. I froze, unsure of what to do. I couldn't get a closer look, and for a few seconds, I just stood there, staring at the figure. Then, slowly, they began to walk away, disappearing deeper into the forest. I didn't know what to make of it. It was strange and unsettling, but part of me thought maybe I had imagined it. I switched off the lights, locked the door, and went to bed, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest. The next morning, I got ready for work again, just like any other day. When I went downstairs to the kitchen, I opened the pantry, and there it was, the box of cereal I thought had been missing, sitting right where I had left it. I didn't understand. Had I just missed it yesterday? I quickly ate, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. But the memory of the figure in the yard lingered, gnawing at me all day. As the day went on, the more I thought about it, the more I became sure that the cereal hadn't been there the night before. And the figure, how could I just ignore that? The idea of someone being out there watching my house was unsettling. I tried to focus on work, but I couldn't shake the growing sense of dread. Finally, it was Friday, and the weekend was ahead. My boss let us go home early, and I was more than happy to leave. I drove home, arriving just before 5. As soon as I stepped through the door, something felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was an underlying tension in the air. I walked into the kitchen. Everything seemed in place, nothing out of the ordinary. But then I heard something. It came from the living room, a soft, distant sound. "Hello," I called out. Silence. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I stepped toward the living room, scanning the room as I moved. I walked carefully through the house, checking behind furniture and in every corner, but there was no one there. I was beginning to convince myself I was just being paranoid when I heard it again. Footsteps, soft but unmistakable, shuffling through the kitchen. My blood ran cold. I turned and looked down the hallway. At the far end, I saw him, a man standing there, just staring at me. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. We locked eyes for what seemed like an eternity. Then, in an instant, I snapped into action. I spun around, yanked open the front door, and bolted outside. I could hear his footsteps following me, getting closer, as I ran all the way to my neighbor's house. They called the police for me and let me stay with them until help arrived. By the time the police came, the man was gone. But they found something disturbing. One of the window hinges had been broken, allowing access to my house even when the window was locked. They also discovered traces that the man had likely been inside my house for hours, eating my food and moving around freely. There was no way to tell how long he had been doing this. After that night, I put my house up for sale. I couldn't live there anymore, not with the memory of that man standing at the end of my hallway, staring at me with those dead, hollow eyes. It still haunts me, and I don't know if he meant me harm or if he was just living in my house because he could. Either way, I couldn't stay. I couldn't feel safe there anymore.